Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good As Gold Australia. And today, once again, I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good As Gold.
Good morning, Darryl.
Brian, and today we interview David Morgan from the Morgan Report and recently appointed advisor to As Good As Gold Australia. Good morning, David.
Oh, good morning, Darryl and Brian. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Now, we'll have to say that's good evening over there. So, the time zones are a little different, but the most important thing is we talk with one another.
That's so correct.
Yeah. It's a good time of day for me, so thank you.
Yeah. Well, today, David, we thought we'd like to talk about debt. It seems to be, I think in many cases, an overlooked subject, as if it doesn't count for much. But I want to talk about debt, the ramifications of debt, how long we may have to prepare for those ramifications that debt brings, and then what's the best form of protection in that environment? What can we do to protect our wealth? So I want to just cast back for a moment, a gentleman by the name of Vern Galdi, and I have referred to Vern before. He's an Australian economist. And he said, look, I've only ever known one way for anyone to go broke, and that's to have too much debt. And at the moment, the world is swimming in it. And so it's got to have severe ramifications. And a lot of people are glossing over this, like, no, like governments wouldn't allow this sort of thing to happen, and she's right, mate. But things aren't right, mate. And so I thought, now in the United States of America, you've got President Joe Biden, of course. And Joe's there, his major commitment, I believe, is to be re-elected. That's what he really wants. He wants to be re-elected, like all past presidents. And so Joe Biden has embarked on MMT, modern monetary theory, in a very big way. And, it seems as though, whenever there's a need to shape the monetary requirements of the country, it gets down to more printing. No thought about ever repaying it. I want to highlight something here. Joe Biden has already, after 100 days, been a masterful user of MMT. He's committed himself to around $6 trillion. Now, these are unheard of numbers up until a few years ago. What does that consist of? So the $6 trillion consists of $1.9 trillion stimulus plan, a $2.3 trillion infrastructure spending plan, and $1.8 trillion of expansion on the social safety net. Now, with MMT, there is never any line of thought of paying the debt back. All you do is print more money to pay. If you're going to pay the interest on the debt, just print more of the stuff. And we're reaching a point now where I think it's at its limit. Jerome Powell, chairman of the Fed, just recently said we're not slowing down. We have no intentions of slowing down on asset purchases. And no thought in mind of considering tapering. So he says inflation is under control. He has warned that we can expect higher inflation in the coming months. However, he says nothing to worry about. We've got it under control. Now, I'm suggesting that they've had nothing under control since 1981. Because all we've seen is an expansion of the debt since then. So maybe I'm missing out on something here, David, but I'd like to ask you, why would that change now? Why have we got nothing to worry about? According to Jerome, do they have a secret weapon?
Well, Darryl, you covered quite a bit, and several thoughts came in. I didn't make notes, but I probably could have. So, first of all, let's talk about just the initiation of the debt, because even though you know it and I know it and most of our listeners know it, there'll be new viewers. And you will hear the more establishment type make statements like, well, the debt doesn't matter because we owe it to ourselves, which sounds good. In fact, my own father years ago said, well, don't be so worried about the debt. We owe it to ourselves. And, he picked that phrase up somewhere on the telly or something, who knows. But the fact is that every dollar that comes into existence is a debt instrument. It's borrowed into existence, and it's borrowed from a private corporation. And that private corporation is called the Federal Reserve. And when the United States government borrows from that bank, they owe it back, and they owe interest on it. So we don't owe it to ourselves. The United States citizen that's a U.S. citizen taxpayer, and right now, let me digress and just make a funny joke that is not hilarious at all. But when you have more people that vote for a living than work for a living, you're getting very near the end of a democracy.
See.
Meaning that the majority can vote themselves free money, MMT, modern money theory. And it works until it doesn't. So back to the point, you have to borrow the money, and we don't owe it to ourselves. We owe it to a cartel of elite banksters, and the commercial banks. I mean, as the Fed was founded at the end of 1913, and the most powerful banking elites created it, and Congress passed it, and there's still debate whether it was really passed legally or not, but I don't have time to go into that, and it's immaterial at this point anyway. But the point being that the Fed has diluted itself for public relation purposes. So rather than just these greedy few bankers getting interest on the money by loaning money to the United States government, they put it through the commercial bank. So now it's really what my friend G. Edward Griffin calls a quasi-government institution. But still, it's not a government institution. It's quasi. Look it up. So that's number one. We don't owe it to ourselves. So that's an absolute, complete, ridiculous statement that's made all the time by the establishment to try to ease people's minds that it really doesn't matter how big the debt is. It doesn't matter. It does. It matters a great deal. But it doesn't matter until the day it does matter. And that's my second point. MMT. You can have free stuff until you don't have any more of it. I mean, let's just take this just popped in my head. Sometimes I come up with great thought experiments and analogies, and sometimes I don't, but I'll run with it. So the fair comes to town, and they bring the Ferris wheel and all the rides and the barkers and the booze and all the carnival candy and soda pops and the hot dogs and the elephant ears and everything else that goes in there. And they usually plan for a certain amount of time. So let's say the time that they plan on the average stay in a large town in Australia is 10 days. So they usually have a plan to back it up with maybe 12 days worth of food, because you never know. You might have a couple of really good days. You might sell more tickets than the average. So let's plan a buffer. And let's say on this particular event, they decide to just give out free food. You come in. Now, what's going to happen with free food? Well, people that probably weren't going to buy anything to eat because they ate at home come in, and now it's free. So what are they going to do? Well, they'll take advantage of that offer, and they'll eat probably more, something they weren't planning on buying anyway. And people that see the offer will probably eat more than they normally do, and on it goes. So the point being is that when something is free, it has little value. And if you make free money, it will have value until it doesn't. Yeah. So we're in a point now where we're at the end game. And this is not unusual. If you study monetary history and you look how a fiat currency collapses, it's the old joke, and I laugh at my own jokes. It's not my joke, but, very slowly than all at once. And that's what's going to happen in my view. It does matter. The debt does matter. And what matters the most is psychology, not math. We are mathematically at a point, and have been for a very long time, where it's absolutely impossible to pay back the debt. You could tax all of the people that make more than $1 million a year, 100%, doesn't matter, wouldn't pay off the debt, even close.
No.
You could, the only way you can really get rid of it, well, there's two ways, and there's variables on those. One, you could default, which is really morally more appropriate. And I don't mind taking a moral high standard, but when you make a loan with with a bank, and the bank says, Brian, Darryl, we're going to give you this loan for X amount, and you're going to build out your storage facility, and something doesn't work and you can't pay it back. The bank eats it. They made a bad loan. They took the risk. And that's how it's supposed to work. But under the MMT, which has been going on for a lot longer, it's just we haven't talked about it in those terms, is that hasn't existed for a very long time. If you go back to 2008 and you made a bad loan and the bank isn't going to get paid back, they go and they say something like this to the Federal Reserve Board. They say, wah, 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 wah. And they cry and they cry and they wah, wah, wah. And they say, you've got to give me my money because I made a bad choice and I made a bad loan and I'm not going to get paid back. Wah, 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 wah. And so they cry and then they get paid by the Federal Reserve, which is big daddy or big brother taking care of all their bankster buddies. Absolutely the most immoral, corrupt, uncapitalistic thing you could possibly do. The right to succeed and the right to fail go hand in hand. And if you make a bad loan, you make a bad loan. And if you make a bad loan, you have to pay the consequences, like go out of business, your bank doesn't exist. Oh, wait a minute. Wah, 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 wah. I'm too big to go out of business. That's how important I am. Now I have to, pause here a bit and say, you could build that case. I could make that argument, but it's not the way it's supposed to work. And if the too big to fail banks did fail, we'd still be here. Believe me, if every bank in the country failed tomorrow, nothing changes in the physical economy. All the corn, all the wheat, all the roads, all the schools, all exist. The physical economy doesn't change. The sun comes up in the early morning and shines for wherever you are on the planet, depending. It could be 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever. What changes is a huge shift in the ownership of those assets. But the assets don't blow away. They don't burn to the ground. They don't become useless or worthless. So I've given a long answer, but there's 2 points. One is we don't owe it to ourselves. So that argument is fallacious at its core. We owe it to the banksters. The idea that you can print yourself out of this is preposterous. Every time it's been tried, it goes into hyperinflation. The currency is shunned by the populace. They don't want it. They rather have anything but money. I mean, the old joke, which is not a joke, it's a true story at the Weimar Republic, is someone was negotiating something at the baker and had a wheelbarrow full of money. He went in to make sure he had enough in the wheelbarrow to buy whatever it was, a donut or something. Came out, the money was on the sidewalk and the wheelbarrow had been stolen. So this is where we're headed. Now, are we going to get there in the United States? My answer is I doubt it. Because what will happen is the bond market will probably adjust to where there's a huge deflationary force, meaning that bonds crash in value or in price, I should say, because there's no value to bond. Look, if the dollar is essentially worthless, then why would a dollar that's a note that's 2 years out, or a note 5 years out, or a bill or a bond 10 years out, or 120 or 30 years out be worth anything? If it's not worth anything today, why would it be worth something 6 months from now, or a year, or 2 years, or 5 years, or 10 years, or 20 years? It wouldn't be. So the whole bond market is a big scam at this point in time, but we all pretend it's going to be okay. And it's not okay. So the real truth of the matter is we're nearing the end game. And I did an interview this morning, and the interviewer, and this cannot be debated, it's just a personal preference, you might say, of where this analogy really is. And he is saying we're accelerating toward the guardrail. And, we got to stop this thing before, and I said, no, you got it wrong. We're through the guardrail. We're flying in the air. We're heading to the bottom of the canyon. And we're making sure our seatbelt's on, and we're looking for a new channel on the radio. And that's probably closer to where we are.
Yeah.
And we've got time to brake and avoid the crash. I don't want to sound like a doomer, but I'm not. I'm a realist. And the real truth is every fiat currency throughout all of recorded history has failed. This one is failing before our eyes. And as you so accurately portrayed, Darryl, we're in the acceleration mode, which is indicator that we don't have much time left. And why is that? Well, I've studied markets my whole life. And I said markets, not just the silver and the gold market, but the financial markets. And I'm fairly well versed technically. And you don't even have to be. Anytime you see what we call the hockey stick, when anything goes straight up, I don't care if it's soybean oil or corn, it could be silver, it could be a stock, it could be the real estate market on aggregate. Anything that goes straight up doesn't have a long duration, and it's going to end badly. So we've now hit that sort of hockey stick moment in the base money supply and the aggregates above that, meaning M2 and M3 that you don't even report anymore. Don't look here. Wah, 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 wah. We don't want to look there anymore. So we are, I would say, my studied opinion, unable to get to the next election before there will be a currency crisis. I don't think we can go another 3.5 years without hitting the bottom of the canyon. I really believe that. Because, as I said, it's not me. It's, David thinks, or David believes, or David trusts, or no. The data says we're going straight up and we're accelerating, which means we've hit that parabolic point. And we know those parabolic points don't last forever. Now, as I said, and this is the most accurate statement, they work until they don't work. So when doesn't it work? Well, we don't know. Could be 6 days, could be 6 months. I doubt it's 6 years. I would guess it's somewhere between 6 and 9 months. So what happens? Well, if 6 trillion doesn't do it, believe me, Darryl, 12 will. Because if you're insane, whatever doesn't work, you do more of it. Because if it doesn't work at 6 trillion, 12 certainly is going to do the job. So once you get into that idea and everyone starts to catch on, when they get that stimulus check that isn't $1,400, but $2,800, anybody that's caught on, which will be a lot of people by that point, will immediately take that check and buy anything and everything they can of value for the present and future. So it'd be food and food that could be stored like canned food. Anything left over would go into a hard good of some type. It could be a shovel. It could be precious metals, of course. It could be, books. It could be almost anything, but it's back to the wheelbarrow in front of the baker. I'd rather own a wheelbarrow than take this check and put it in the bank. Now, right now, people are saving. They're putting money in the bank. They're getting rid of debt. And there is a double-edged sword to this, Brian and Darryl, and that is what was said and maybe not heard as well as perhaps it could have been. And the only way to go broke is to have too much debt. And the only way to not go broke is to have no debt. And have some means to feed yourself. You could actually, as an Amish person, as an example, but anybody could do it if you had the wherewithal. You'd have to have property. You'd have to know how to grow food, and you'd have to be able to raise, livestock. But you could, in theory, if you had no debt and land and skills, you really wouldn't need money. Now, that's an extreme example, but my point being that being debt-free is freedom. But very few people are. And even people with a lot of quote unquote currency aren't, because there's a tax advantage to paying off a mortgage or they want the leverage, or they want to live a higher lifestyle than maybe their income has, or there's lots of reasons why people use debt. A lot of people use it to their own advantage, or they use it wisely. And then a lot of people don't use it wisely. So I think there's one last point I'd like to make, and that's just very simple. You have to be able to keep things as simple as possible so that you know them not only in your head or intellectually, but you have to know them in your head. And more importantly, I would say now in your gut. I mean, your gut instinct, if I can be so crude, is that looking out the window in Adelaide or Melbourne or one of the, or even a small town in Australia, take a good hard look at what the business life really looks like and ask yourself to feel it with your gut rather than think about it with your head, and ask yourself, are we getting better or worse? And is more money or more currency going to make this better or worse? And am I personally in a position to do okay if, one, my income stopped, or my job was lost, or I had some type of I'll call it a hiccup, a polite word for, medical problem, or, the cars, goes out or whatever. And the answer for the US, I won't speak for the Australians, I like them too much. But in America, most of them would say, no, anything over $400, I'm sunk. And that's a sad state of affairs. So we are in a position where, again, we are so close to hitting, I think we're just months away from that car going through the guardrail, over the edge, flying through, and we're trying to tune in the right political party, or trying to tune that radio into the right monetary theory, or trying to tune that radio into the right, infrastructure policy. We're trying to tune it into just what is the exact right amount of free money for everybody. And all that stuff is just tuning the radio, and that car is going to hit the bottom of the canyon at terminal velocity. And I think we all know what the word terminal means. So back to you.
Yeah, so what you're saying is there is no immediate recovery. It's really interesting. I turned on the television this morning. I don't watch mainstream media a lot, but I turned it on this morning because I knew that we would be having this interview, and I just thought, I'll just see if I can catch up on the latest. And here in Sydney today, we've had another one case. And so what they've done is that they've put 14 suburbs on high alert. And over one case. Don't know where it came from. This is the concern, of course.
Were you talking about coronavirus?
Coronavirus,
yes,
yeah. So we're entering the winter now. We have all this debt around us. We're entering the winter phase. So we're looking, and we've got a lot of people out there who don't want to take the vaccine. So I think we're going to experience a lot of casualties over COVID-19, a lot more than we have in the past with this new wave. But I guess the point I'm leading to here is this is going to lead to, as it already has today, massive disruption of business. So we carry all of this debt, and we've got this ongoing issue with COVID-19 and all of the ramifications associated with it. But none of this would have been a problem because everyone says, well, COVID-19 was the cause of this. We had huge problems before COVID-19, massive problems before COVID-19. If we'd have had a healthy economy, we wouldn't be in the dire position that we're in today. And, I just want to highlight a couple of points here. And once again, we're talking about debt, and David, you've done a wonderful job, I think, educating our viewers today on how serious this condition is. It'll survive, and you can operate with it until you can't. And I just want to bring forward another point. You've got Debt at the moment, the US, $28 trillion in 2021. I mean, we talk trillions now like it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Used to be billions.
It used to be billions, yeah. It was millions, billions, and now it's trillions. Trillions doesn't sound too bad because, 28, it's only 28, right? Trillion. But the US, here's the scary thing. The US has doubled every 8 years. Now, you mentioned this too, David. We're not going to resolve this where you can tax over $1 million income earners, and that's not even going to have any impact at all on paying back this debt. Debt's up 31 times since 1981. Taxes is only up 6 times. So they're clearly not going to resolve this problem taxing us. So I know that you've said this is just around the corner. I just can't imagine this lasting much longer at all. I want to make one last comment and then have your impressions on this. Stock market at the moment. Dow Jones, 1970 through 2021. Since March, the growth, the steep move in the Dow or on the Dow has been dramatic. More so than at any other time in the last 50 years. Normally when something goes for an absolute rip, it comes down at about the same rate. So we must be getting very close, David, to experiencing that. Just your thoughts on that for a moment.
Yes, one is that markets used to go down faster than they go up. So if they're going up exponentially, they're going to come down, as you said, about the same rate, maybe a bit faster. Two, it's inevitable. Unless the only caveat would be a true hyperinflationary depression. I mean, if you go back to the Weimar Republic and you look at all the monetary aggregates that were available at the time. In fact, I did a whole lecture on this years ago, but I showed graphs, and I showed the graph of the German stock market, and it went up and up and up. So you were much better taking that wheelbarrow after you got your food and someone didn't steal your wheelbarrow to put the rest of it into the stock. The best would be in precious metals. I'll get to that in a minute. But if you put it in the stock market, you lost less than if you kept it in the bank, but you still lost. So you could see in a hyperinflationary depression, stocks are better than cash, but not nearly as good as the precious metals. The only thing that kept you afloat in the Weimar Republic was precious metals. You had life insurance policies that were fully paid for. In fact, there's a story I read in one of these hyperinflationary books behind me here, where, an elderly couple worked their whole lives, good citizens, living off their, basically we'll call it an annuity today, but it was their whole life that was paying them a monthly income. By the time the inflation accelerated, by the way, it took months for that acceleration to happen. It wasn't like the Weimar Republic went from, 0 to hero in 3 days. I'm going to digress a little bit more. If you go back to Zimbabwe, it was, I think, a year and a half. It was 18 months. You can check me on it. But here's the idea. So a Zim dollar and a US dollar were the same. And then after 6 months, one US dollar was like 10,000 Zims. And then 6 months after that, one Zim dollar was 500 million Zims. And then by the end of it, after 18 months, there was no value. $1 was uncalculable because and I'll have to pull one out, excuse me as I look away, but this, I don't want to say it wrong, $100 trillion.
We're holding the same note. No,
$100 trillion was worthless. So, and here's a thought experiment for everybody. I think I said this on your show last time, but it's worth repeating. My dear mother-in-law, I had one of these. I used to give them out at the shows all the time. And she goes, "Oh,
I thought you and I had the only two."
yeah, right." She said, "Oh, if only it were real." And I said, "It is." And it went right over her head, because everyone associates a big number with, wealth. If you're a millionaire, it doesn't mean much in the U.S. anymore. It used to. 100,000 used to mean something in the 1950s.
Yeah.
If you had $100,000 saved by the end of your life in the 1950s, you were in what we call Fat City. You had a pretty healthy retirement. You didn't have much to worry about. And of course, then it becomes a million, and it becomes 10 million. The point being is it was real, and 100 trillion is worthless. There's a book behind me on that shelf that's called The Penniless Billionaires. Now, again, I do not believe the U.S. is going to go into that type of a hyperinflation. I really, really doubt it. But it doesn't have to. The currency can collapse without going into that kind of a situation. It's a psychological event, not a math problem. The math problem, as we talked about, and I'm repeating, is done. It's impossible to tax enough. And the thing I wanted to say about the MMT, which is really funny, and this is 100% pure logic, yet you'll probably get a lot of negative comments. But if MMT is so good, there should be no taxes. Because if you can print all the money you need, then why bother collecting the taxes?
Exactly.
Just send out all the money everybody needs to be a millionaire. There's an old joke in the late 70s when Carter was president. And the joke went like this. I think most of our viewers will get the joke. But they said, Mr. President, inflation's hit 13%. Foodstuffs are going up, gasoline's going, everything's going up. It's costing more and more and more. But in those days, we had what's called, most places had COLA, cost of living adjustments. So most of the working class was getting these huge adjustments to their salaries to keep up with inflation. And the president says, well, who cares? We'll all be rich. So in other words, they'll just keep printing it and giving it to everybody. And if it costs more, we'll just print more. And if it costs more than that. Remember, and this is the truth, and people won't believe what I'm about to say. But the cry the whole way up in the Weimar Republic was, there's not enough money. Think about it.
Wow. Yeah, very powerful point.
David, it does remind me of all the articles that I read and books that I read, and there's two that come to mind in regards to statements. And one's from Egon von Grass, and the other one's from Jim Sinclair. And it's all about not making money, but protecting the wealth that you have. And I will just show on screen here, there's a couple of books that I would like people to, you've already mentioned it. It's The Creature from Jekyll Island. The gentleman, you're so close to the gentleman who wrote this book, but that's probably the one that inspired me the most. It gave me a lot of indication of where things are going. The other one is a book not recognised very much, The Lords of Finance. But down here it says, The Lords of Finance, the bankers that broke the world. And I've read them both. There's a lot of things here. I make notes in my books. And all important, what I got out of those two books, out of those two readings, is exactly what I've just said, protecting your wealth. And I recommend that to anybody. I will bring up right now, on the subject of protecting your wealth, why are we talking about, why do we talk about owning silver and gold? And the most important thing that Darryl and I did, when we started As Good as Gold Australia, we said we're not going to do or promote anything but physical silver, physical gold. I was talking to Alistair McLeod the other week, and he said, try to avoid any institution that holds pool allocated and unallocated as both setups, right? It's all right to have pool allocated, but don't have unallocated as well, because there's a fine line there between having physical and borrowing from one account to go to the other account. My point is, physical metal will always save you, when it comes to part of your financial structure. If you have a paper contract, that is just a piece of paper, just like the note that we saw. And the bottom line there is it's a paper contract that doesn't produce any wealth whatsoever. Now, Craig Hemke from the US has just started a program and is asking 100,000, correct me if I'm wrong, 100,000 clients to buy 100 ounces of silver in the month of May. Darryl and I have already started. We buy it anyway. But is that program, have you heard of that program, David, and what's happening in the United States?
Yes, I have read about it. Seen it on, I think, Twitter as well. And what does that come to? 10 million ounces? Is that right? They did the math right. So I was asked about a week ago, and no one knows the answer to this question. So my answer doesn't make it correct. How much silver would have to come off in physical form for the bullion banks to have a problem? And my answer was 100 million ounces. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is 100 million ounces is about all that's on the registered category of the COMEX right now. It's slightly more than that. I think it's 120 million. I just looked at it and I don't remember the number, but it's roughly, round numbers, it's 100 million. Secondly, that when the February silver rush took place, in I think 3 days trading period, there was 110 million ounces of silver bought through the stock exchange, because that's paper silver. The SLV, when you participate in the SLV, you're getting a stock certificate. You are not getting a piece of silver. You're getting a stock certificate. You're getting a piece of paper. However, that paper is supposedly or purportedly representing a pool of physical metal, and the bar numbers, et cetera, are put into the website. When that took place, the SLV's, I'll say legal team, I'm not sure who actually wrote the document, most likely the legal team, put out a revised issuance of their terms and conditions, basically, saying that they weren't sure if they could get all the metal in a timely manner. In other words, that round number 100 million ounces that was demanded in physical form was putting the hurt on the SLV. So that, I think, is a good number. Now, the other part of that question is, well, does it have to come off in commercial bar form, or could it come off in silver rounds, silver coins, silver kilos, and silver 100-ounce bars? And the answer is it really doesn't matter. There's a slight, I'm not going to make the argument. Silver is silver, whether it's 1 ounce of silver or 1,000 ounces of silver, silver is silver. And so if it was 100 million ounce demand in coins alone, that would be 100 ounces or 100 million ounces of demand. And silver doesn't stop and ask the purchaser, hey, are you an institution or are you an individual? It doesn't care. It's demand. So that's the answer to that. And I got a little sidetracked, Brian, but I do think I remember the gist of our combined thinking on this. And that is keep stacking and wealth preservation. The main thing in a deflationary, excuse me, I'm a little tired, deflationary depression or inflationary depression is wealth preservation. And what is wealth? Well, this is not much of an argument. Wealth, especially me being an adherent to the Austrian school for the most part, is production, producing wealth. Well, what's wealth production? Growing food, making factories, making an automobile, building a road, building a school, building a house, building an office building, building intellectual property like software that can do your accounting for you instead of having a whole 5 bookkeepers. A computer entry person can do it all. That is wealth. Wealth is the means of production That is what wealth is. And it is tangible in most cases, not in today's era where a lot of it's electronic, but a lot of it is tangible. So when you talk about, the wealth of nations, it's not how many pieces of paper you can print. As I told my mother-in-law, that is real. But if it had any meaning to it, they'd be the richest country in the world, bar none. They'd be so rich they could buy the United States, pay off the debt, and throw a big party for everybody. But that's not how it works, and we all know it. But yet we pretend, as Darryl said, that MMT is a great idea. We'll just print our ways out of this. Everyone will be happy. Inflation's under control. And oh, by the way, if it happens to get out of control, we are going to get it under control. We are the masters of whack-a-mole. When that doggone little critter puts its heads up out of that little cave, we will just whack it down and we'll stop inflation immediately because we are the masters of the universe. So, I get very frustrated because it's so simple. You can't get something for nothing. The entire system is based on creating money from basically nothing. And let me just digress a little bit because, most people have heard this before, but remember, all dollars, and all this is true of all central banks, all governments borrow from the central bank. There's no government that I'm aware of. Maybe there could be a few, I could be wrong, but it'd be 1, 2, or 3 at the most, that are sovereign where they actually create their own currency. Maybe Russia does. I really don't know. I should. But regardless, I don't think they do. But regardless, it's borrowed into existence from a central bank. And so the banks have all the power. And then it's owed back to them. So if you look at how it works in the United States, and I've had people very upset with me. They say, well, David, you are absolutely wrong. I've been to Washington District of Criminals. I went through the Treasury, and the Treasury prints the money. Well, I go, well, what's the problem? I never said the Treasury didn't print the money. Well, it's U.S. money printed by the Treasury. I go, it's U.S. money printed by the Treasury for the Federal Reserve that pays about printing costs, which I don't know the number anymore, but we'll call it 10 cents a bill. It's 10 cents for a $1. It's 10 cents for a $10. It's 10 cents for $100. And that's what they pay the Treasury. So they pay the same price for a $100 bill as they pay for a $1 bill. And then they loan it at face value plus interest when it's loaned into the system. And that's how it works. Now, if you and I did that, we go to jail. It's called counterfeiting. Right. But the governments have given a monopoly to these banks so the banks can destroy them. So the banks can destroy the wealth of anybody because it can get to the point where there's meaninglessness to the value in terms of price. I shouldn't have used the value and price word in the same sentence. Let me restate it. The price becomes meaningless and the value has to be determined against another good. So in other words, a can of tuna that costs $10 one day and $100 a week later is not a function of price anymore. It's a function of what does that can of tuna represent to me as far as what can I trade for it, or how long can I eat it, or how many cats can I feed it to, or that type of thing. And we don't want to get to that point. And I'm not sure we will. I mean, as much as I'm talking about possibility of a hyperinflationary depression, the powers that be don't want it either. And they will implement to the best of their ability some type of new monetary system, probably based on some type of hybrid between the MMT, where there is a UBI, universal basic income, and there's also a structure in there for, preserving the wealth that still exists. And they'll try to make this thing work. And whether or not it will work or not remains to be determined. But what we really have to focus on is, and most important, and I think Brian's, so far I'll give Brian a little higher star rating than you, Darryl, because, and maybe you said it first, I'm trying to be funny. It's the preservation of wealth. At the end times like this, you don't really want to, you shouldn't care so much about, is my net worth increasing? Is my lifestyle going to stay the same? You want to, one, have a lifestyle. You, number two, want to preserve what you have. So in these type of end games, he who loses least wins. That's where it's coming, because when you start to close down the means of production, which is happening all over the world in all kinds of sectors, not just food, semiconductors, it's happening in many areas, which means there's less stuff. And most of this stuff, a lot of this stuff is required stuff. Food's a requirement. And energy is a requirement. A new laptop probably isn't a requirement, although there could be someone that it is. You know, I don't want to digress too far, but someone just got laid off, has to work from home. They had a computer at work. They don't have one at home. And until that semiconductor gets in that computer, they're out of work. And they want to work and they can work, but they need, you know, a piece of hardware to be able to. So, you know, I don't want to go down into the rabbit hole too far, but honest to goodness, people, to repeat again, preservation of wealth is absolutely critical. And there's only one way to do it that I know of that's been proven through thousands of years of history, and that's physical metal. Yes, you can have cryptos. Yes, you can have stocks. Yes, you can have real estate. Yes, you can store food. Yes, you can have a farm. All those things are probably valid, but there's nothing that comes close to the portability, the desirability, and the functionality of silver and gold money. Because one, per unit, even silver has high value per volume, universally recognized and easily used in any type of situation, whether you're in an inflationary depression, a deflationary depression, something in between. And are we going to be out there in the outback and bartering? I don't know. Probably not, but we might. And even if you don't have to barter with it, there's no one in Venezuela that sits there that's buying food with silver right now that thinks about anything more than it works. They're not thinking too much about the price. They're not thinking about, you know, what David Morgan has to say about the silver market. All they know is they're damn glad they had silver saved and they can buy food with it. And whoever's selling that food doesn't want anything else but silver. It's that simple. So let's keep it. I'll try to keep it simple.
One statement that I do remember came out of one of Jim Rickard's books, but he was talking about the family that he sat down to dinner with. It was an Italian family and had their wealth for 12 centuries. I mean, that is a long time. But he asked the simple question, keeping it simple. He asked the simple question, how have you kept your wealth for such a long period of time, 800 years? It's very simple, the lady said of the family. She said, 1/3 land, 1/3 fine art, and 1/3 precious metal. Right? So we're not asking everybody to be 100% in, but it's a proportionate amount. The trouble is that the proportions are very much one-sided to the real estate market and nothing on the precious metals market. In fact, right now, I think it's about 0.5% of the population owns precious metals, whereas real estate, I don't know the figure, but it's much, much more than 0.5%. And just before we hand it over to Darryl, I did some figures. It's like a back of the envelope figure, but I studied it a bit more than that. And for the people that own the real estate or do have a big proportion of real estate, they should really listen to yourself, David, ourselves, because I looked at one of the sites I look at just to get the pricing of silver and gold on a daily basis is a goldprice.org, so it's worldwide price. And in the last 20 years in the United States, gold in 20 years, it's gone up by 567%. Now, silver's not far from that, but we're talking precious metals here. 567% for the last 20 years. If you break it down, it's about 28% a year. So, if you had some real estate, right, and let's say you had property worth $1.5 million worth of real estate paid off, right, that 20% a year would mean, or 28% a year would mean that would give you $420,000 a year. Now, if it's the same as the last 20 years as it is for the next 20, and I think it's going to be better in the next 20 years as far as the price of gold and silver going up, why not diversify your portfolio from no precious metals to at least 1/3 precious metals. What's your feeling, David?
Well, there's been one, you have to have it. I mean, it's an absolute must. And, if you want to do the SLV or whatever, look, I would say, okay, if and only if you have stacked physical metal first. So if you don't, go to the French novel or these books behind me or whatever, and realize what we just talked about a minute ago about fungibility, transfer, you're able to use it anywhere in the world, easily recognized, divisible, and all that. That's only true in the physical realm with physical coins or bars. So you've got to start there. As far as what's the right amount, it varies person to person. But there's been a few studies that have been done that are objective. It's just, running the algorithm, basically, running the math formula. Number one was Harvard University, and I forget what their number was. I'll just poke at 20%. I don't recall. Number two was Ibbotson and Associates. That was run in about 20 years ago by Nick Bereshef out of BMG in Canada. They took three scenarios. The minimum was 15.7%, and the maximum in the scenario like we're in right now was pushing toward 30%. And the last one that I'm aware of, there could be several more. Maybe there's some in, some of the major banks that only are, pulled out of a secret file and given to clients that are worth, 100 million or more. I don't know. The ones that I'm familiar with, I'm talking about, they're publicly disclosed, and that CPM Group looked at the best portfolio weighting from 1968 on, which is a pretty good place to start because it went off the gold standard in the U.S. in 71. So pretty much just before we entered this highly inflationary environment since we went off the gold standard. And the correct amount was 25%. So maybe I'm slightly under you, but I read the book. I mean, I've spoken to Jim Rickards, as you know, and, it's very simple. 1/3 land, 1/3 fine art, and 1/3 gold. Now, fine art, I won't talk about. I know very little about it, but I do know it holds its value over time. That's a fact. Land, I'm all for it, but the problem, the way I see it, is in today's world. Well, let's go back in the I'll call older European. The expression there was never sell the mud. In other words, when you own that city block, your great grandfather owned that city block, and it was covered with stick buildings. And 100 years later, it was concrete buildings. And 100 years after that, it was high rises with steel and glass. And 100 years after that, it was back to wood buildings. But the point is, you never sell the mud. You always keep the land because it could be improved and it could be torn down and re-improved. So the idea there was that was no mortgage, free and clear, and you could improve the land in all kinds of different ways. It could be farm, it could be commercial, it could be residential, it could be anything. That was secondary. I wouldn't say it was immaterial. Of course, it's material to the value. But the real value is, as they said, I'll repeat, never sell the mud. Always keep the land. So that's important to know because people get the idea that, I'm going to get this big house. Look, we're getting to an energy crunch too. Most people don't talk about it. So if you're very wealthy, think about this as a thought experiment. We go into a hyperinflationary depression, and it's only 20% inflation a year, okay? You could be in a situation where your income stays static because they're not giving out cost of living adjustments anymore, and they haven't for decades. So your ritzy job that you're pretty comfortable buying this $2 million home that has a heating and that has a utility bill of $1,100, it's pretty easy to do. Your salary stays the same, and all of a sudden inflation hits at 20% a year. Now all of a sudden, a year or two down the road, you can't afford to heat your own house. And this is the type of thing people don't really think about. Some do, I do, but about where it's going to go. I mean, very few people in this country, well, I don't know how to state this correctly because I don't know the numbers. It's my perception and experience that from the time I was a teenager till now, most people when I was young lived within their means. They made X. They lived in a house they could afford. They drove a car they could afford. Yeah, they might have gone into debt and had a 2-year loan on their car, but their objective was to pay it off. And from that point, when I was in my early 20s till now, decades later, it's all about how much leverage can I get? And no thought about what if something goes wrong or my wife can't work or something happens. There's no forethought for saving. There's none of that. Now there is right now. I mean, I have to be clear because of the illness and the massive amount of capital destruction throughout the restaurant industry and small businesses across the world, not just in the US, where people that were making a good living, a lot of people just want enough. They aren't megalomaniacs. They don't have to have $1 billion. They don't even have to be a millionaire. They just want to feed their family, pay for the house, live within their means, and have a business. And a lot of them love the restaurant business. And they make a good living at it until they don't. The illness comes along and now they have to close down by a mandate from the state. And now they're out of business and they have very little prospects for bringing that business back. So they live off what savings they have. And in small businesses, some probably, a fair amount probably do. And it's gone. So I digress. You can reel me back in. But honest to goodness, I don't think, and this is what I really want to emphasize on the show is, one, wealth preservation, and two is, as bad as it sounds, people, and I hate playing the fear card, it's worse than you think. It really is.
Can't agree more.
Yep, have to agree. I know that you've heard of this gentleman, Charlie Tremendous Jones. I've always spoken highly of Charlie. I saw him on stage many times and was once on stage as a speaker with him, which was quite an experience. But he always used to refer to, or he would say, in 5 years' time, you'll be in exactly the same position you're in right now, apart from two things: the people you meet and the books you read. Very valid statement. Now, our viewing audience and subscribers at the moment have an opportunity to connect with David Morgan, which I see as a fabulous opportunity. And what I'd like you to do, David, just before we go today, because, unfortunately, our time is up. We could go on for hours, but I don't know whether our viewers would tolerate that. But before we do go, I'd like to, if you would, please provide us with some information. Where do people go to follow up and subscribe to the Morgan Report? And what could they expect to learn? What would be the benefits that you see, the main benefits in them doing so?
Okay, well, the easiest thing to do is go to the main website. It's themorganreport.com. The landing page will just ask you for a first name and an email. Get on that because I don't know how long I'll be, allowed to be on YouTube. And, my Twitters aren't that controversial, but in this closed down, lockdown, censorship society, and I am outspoken about the monetary elite, who knows? So get on the free mailing list. That's number one. Number two, for bang for the buck, is hit the books tab. I've written 3 books. 2 are still available. The Silver Manifesto. That's a good overview of economics, the silver and gold market, how fractional reserve banking works, how bullion banking works, why the silver market is manipulated. I prove it beyond, I think, a shadow of a doubt. How to pick your own mining company. So if you're a do-it-yourselfer, and I like David, but I don't want to, buy his service for, $50, I will buy the book instead. There's a whole chapter on how we analyze a mining company. So if you're diligent enough to go through it, and we don't talk over anyone's head, it's not Econ 101, but it's not PhD level either. So there's that in the book. The second book is Second Chance: How to Keep Big Money During the Coming Gold and Silver Shockwave, which is where we are going probably over the next, as I said earlier, 6 months to year and a half. Well, probably more like 2 to 3 years out, but very soon we're going to see the biggest rise in the metals in terms of price they will be revalued, and you will be very happy that you have them. And that whole book is based on being willing to take profits. So if you're underweighted land and overweighted metals, let's say you're perfectly balanced. Let's say you're 1/3 metals, 1/3 fine art, and 1/3 real land. And the metals take off. And 2 years from now, you look at your portfolio and you just do the numbers and you find out your 2/3 is precious metals. 1/6 is art and 1/6 is land.
Yeah.
Then you sell off some of the metals and you rebalance your portfolio.
Yes.
You sell some gold and silver, buy more land and buy more art, and you get back to that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That's what some of the smartest wealth managers in the world do. That's probably what that family that Rick Cards was referring to probably did that a few times. Because things ebb and flow, and sometimes art's the hot thing, and they sell that Rembrandt, and they bought it for 100,000 and it went for 60.7 million. And all of a sudden they look at their balance sheet, and you know what? 89% of our wealth is in art. Let's rebalance, So anyway, I think that was a point worth making. On the books thing, look, I think there's a couple things to know. One, I'm a bit of a health nut, even though I've had my health challenges, especially someone, that's my age, usually has a few. But there's one book that says, you're not sick, you're thirsty. Look it up. Most people don't drink enough water.
Enough.
Number two is money. The book is called Money, M-O-N-E-Y, and the subtitle is Ye, Y-E, shall have honest weights and measures. It's hard to find, and it's probably very costly. I used to buy them by the case. I've only got a few left, but it's a very good book that goes through monetary history. There's beautiful pictures in it, but it's not about the pictures. It's about the history of money and what the legal definitions are for what a note is, what a bill is, what credit is, what a demand is. All those things are laid out in legal terms, so you actually understand what you're never taught, at least in the US, in high school, or even in finance. No one in my finance class ever told us really what a note actually meant when it comes to money. They might tell us what a note meant in our, what was the class called? I can't even think of it. A contract law. You might understand what a note means, but you don't understand what a note means when it comes to a Federal Reserve note. They don't teach you that. So those would be two books. There's another one, and I can't give it out. This book, it's called The Price of Tomorrow. Now, I haven't read it, so you got to kind of trust me, but it was highly recommended by someone. Talks about how in a high technological society, there's a general deflationary trend in products. I didn't see deflationary trend in money. I said in products, which means the laptop of today is maybe lower priced than a laptop of 15 years ago. It's 70 times as powerful. It has a built-in camera and speaker, blah, 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 blah. And this is the general trend in society anyway, because the old adage, which is corny, but it applies, is make a better mousetrap. When someone makes an invention, makes the automobile. It's like, well, a few years later, I can make that thing a little quieter, or I can make it a little more comfortable, or I can make it get a little more mileage, or so there's all these improvements. And over time, you usually get a deflationary trend, meaning you get a better product for the same or a lower price. So he makes that argument. But at the same, and I've read the book, I just read the summary. But at the same time that's happening, you have, as Jim Rogers says, more money today, MMT. We'll just keep printing until everybody's happy. We'll just print enough money till everybody's happy. Well, ask the people of Zimbabwe how happy they were. There were signs all over the country that said starving billionaire. And so this is the direction that we're going. Doesn't mean the end of the world. Doesn't mean everything stops. There's a lot of innovation that takes place. And believe me, a huge dramatic paradigm shift for everybody on the planet, which is the way I see it, produces a lot of aggravation. And out of being aggravated comes motivation. And out of motivation, you can have people such as Charlie Tremendous Jones that have the type of attitude that's required to get through it and maybe better it. I mean, it's not all doom, it's not all gloom. As the Chinese say, it's opportunity at the same time. And there are opportunities. What you really want to focus on is what's needed, not what's wanted. Food is needed, how to heat things, energy, that type of thing. And there will be innovations and we will get through it. But I think we're going to have to hit bottom, as I keep saying, which means a lower standard of living for most people, if not almost everyone, and a revaluation. Knowing the price of everything is meaningless, knowing what the value is. And if I could get a bit philosophical, and you both know me, I think one thing for me personally that's come out of this illness is, and I've always been this way, or more so in my adult life, of the value of interpersonal human relationships. I think before the illness, I kind of took for granted that very good friends or new people at a restaurant was something I kind of took for granted. I got to speak at this event. I got to be in Australia. I got to meet Darryl and Brian. I get to have dinner with them, get to know each other at a personal level. And I cherished it. But I didn't value it the way I do now, because it's something you cannot take for granted anymore. You have to mask up. Yeah. You got to separate out. The menu in our country, I don't know about yours, but the menus have changed. I mean, because there's less business, the proprietors in almost every restaurant, I'm talking high end to low end, say, there's 10 choices on the menu when you used to have 20. Or in a real high-end, steakhouse kind of thing, there might be, 3 choices of steak instead of 6. And I'm not putting it down. I'm just trying to make a real-life example for a lower lifestyle for everybody. Don't plan on anything other than preserving your wealth. That's more important than how rich am I going to get. And think about others at the same time. If you have that extra and if you have the means, be part of the solution. Don't be part of the problem.
Exactly. No, great words of wisdom. And it highlights how accurate Charlie Tremendous Jones was with his comments. When you can get feedback like that from a gentleman by the name of David Morgan, and you can get it for nothing. That information was free of charge. How spectacular does that get? Do you think it might make you a better person being able to absorb and utilise that information? I think so.
Yeah.
And the Morgan Report, of course, is a fantastic opportunity for people, for our subscribers, our viewers. Wonderful opportunity to take advantage of and then benefit from that knowledge and the experience.
Yeah, the books you read, the people you meet, and the Morgan Report is part of the books you read. So it's 100%. That's what it's all about.
100%. David mentioned, just as we say goodbye today, David did mention there were a million comments that he made today that were all invaluable, but one was central banks have all the power. And it's pretty close to being correct. Well, it is correct, but you can have, as Jim Sinclair said, and we always finish on this, Jim Sinclair said, become your own central bank. You take control, right? So you're in charge of your wealth, of your economic future. Why don't you do what they do? They own gold. Why don't you do the same thing? Makes enormous sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You've got to have reserves.
You've got to be in full control.
Correct. David, thank you so much for your input today. Massively researched. I don't think there's anybody in the world who has a greater understanding of precious metals, and in particular in this environment. And your comments today were phenomenal, as they always are, and I think all of our viewers would have generated massive value out of viewing today's interview. So thank you again, David. I would also love to thank our viewing audience, our subscribers. They continue to support this channel, and we thank them very much for doing that. So until next time, can I say, stay well, stay focused, And goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.